Hey there. Sorry about before, everybody. We were having serious technical issues with what I was trying to do before, but we are back now. Took care of the issue, and it's good to be with you tonight. So those of you that were here earlier, thank you for coming back. Alrighty. Well, we've adjusted our setup, got a bit more of a professional thing going here, and we are still reading The Children of Arc. So thank you for tuning in. We are going to jump right in with chapter 5. 3 days passed since Richard left the Marlton house with nothing more than an abrupt thank you. His parents didn't speak much about it, but Kevin thought about him a lot. His father had brought people over once or twice in the past, but never somebody so cool. Kevin hoped he would see him again. On the way to school that morning, Kevin recognized the soft-spoken voice of Ark's mayor on the radio. "Good morning, Mr. Mayor." "Good morning, Tim. Long may we live." "Long may we live." "Always a pleasure, Mr. Mayor." "Sir, some have criticized you for presiding over a state of economic overturn, mostly seen in Ark's Phoenix district. Some have said the following. Mayor Merrick is a freedom fighter. He believes in American restoration. He is convicted with forward thinking, saying we should not only survive, but thrive. However, when it comes to special interest groups netting the bulk of profits citywide, history will yield no distinction from the historically avaricious Elliot Wagner. Mr. Mayor, how does your office respond to these accusations that special interests and greed are the true cornerstones of your legacy?" "My office," the mayor started, before slipping up and laughing. "I can't speak for the entirety of my office, Tim, but I can speak for myself. With all due respect to Mr. Wagner, Ark was previously beholden to a failed economic principle, one that was popular in the old world before mankind's predator altered our course. For argument's sake, we can call that theory globalist politics. It was this idea of excessive borrowing leader to a stronger world union with America at its center. Mayor Wagner applied this very same principle to our trading with Los Angeles, and it is worth noting that, because of that, we have our pistachio farm industry, our beer and wine import and export, and of course, our National Baseball League. You know, Mr. Mayor, I'm glad you brought that up. Some are saying that the current pause on our baseball season is evidence of your administration's lack of investment in some of Ark's more lucrative fields. Would you care to comment on that?" Well, what I was just about to say was that Mayor Wagner's leadership left us at the mercy of Los Angeles, and this did little but create upper echelons of Arctopians, that is, those who had amassed enough wealth to begin trading, while others were left behind to rely on local products at failing stores. Now, what my administration has done is invest in our small businesses. If you observe our current trends, you'll see the fruit of this effort. There are initiatives such as the Marlton Crew and Claymore's Tavern, who have begun to rebuild Ark's foundation and culture from the ground up. And these smaller initiatives will continue to grow the economy of Ark, so that one day Los Angeles may very well be dependent on us. That is why my administration gives annual grants to such businesses. "Dad," Kevin said over the broadcast, "what's a grant?" He was riding in the passenger seat, watching as his father maintained a stern, humorless eye on the road. "A grant is when government gives you money to support your business. Like mine. You bring the brains, they bring the bank." "Wow," Kevin said. So the mayor gave you money? His father darkly laughed. It's a little more complicated than that, son. What do you mean? His father sighed. I opened my business during the Wagner administration. Mayor Wagner didn't give out these sorts of grants. Mayor Wagner is right about that. Mayor Merrick is right about that. The thing of it is, by the time he got to office, our business was already up and running and primarily crowdfunded. I was placed on what is called a wait list, and I'm still waiting. Oh, Kevin said, mostly understanding. Well, when are you going to get your money? His father groaned, however, as they finally pulled into his school. Why don't we save that discussion for another time? Now you get in there and be good, you hear? There's candy in it for you. Kevin adjusted his backpack and put his hand on the door. What is it, son? Kevin wasn't sure if he should ask, but it was burning him inside. Dad, are you ever going to invite Richard back to the house? His father sighed again, and Kevin closely studied his face. He could tell what his answer would be if he looked at him long enough. When his father sighed 3 times, that meant he was just going to tell Kevin what he wanted to hear. Well, son, men like Mr. Renovon, it can be tough to earn their trust. See, everybody in this town is an immigrant from somewhere, just like us. But some have a really rough time with it. They keep to themselves because they're afraid of getting hurt again. Now, I'm not saying Mr. Renovon should have just left the way he did after we fed him and all, but I understand why he did it. So, is he not coming back ever? I didn't say that, son. He might, but when you're dealing with survivors, you have to be patient. What does the Lord say? Kevin blanked out, scrounging up what answer he could. Be thankful? Turn the other cheek, Roger said. Be kind to people even when they don't deserve it, and blessing will come to you. Now get out of here before you're late. All right, Kevin sighed. He hugged his father and got out of the car. Later that same day, Richard Renovon was just getting off work. He'd gone an entire workday without encountering the boss, and that just made his embarrassment even worse. Why had he even gone? He brought extra strength to the job, smashing the hammer down on the walkway like a giant forming mountains, but he still couldn't come up with an answer to that question. Once a great big giant spilled a giant gallon of water and dug a huge trench in the world to prevent a flood, forming the Rocky Mountains. One of his big brother's favorite stories to tell him. Richard hadn't believed it then, and he didn't believe it now, but all the same, that was how he felt. His visit to Roger's house was further proof that he didn't belong among people. He'd seen too much, been through too much. In the end, all he did was embarrass everyone. You here? One of the men said. For once, they weren't talking to him. No one was bothering him now that he'd gone over to the boss's house. It was like some cloud of darkness was hanging over his head, and they all wanted to pretend he wasn't there. Hear about what? Motor? Yeah, I heard. I heard it wasn't him, though. It was his roommate. What, Bart Hoffman? Yeah, he's a drug runner. Everybody knows that. I think they're busting him this time. Yo, is it true they're staging a raid? Because those guys live piping close to my place. I'm about to go uptown. Would that he could. Hearing all of this, Richard discarded his equipment, wiped a thick column of sweat from his head, and started at once towards the bus. Looking like a giant, dusty mess. As he rode the bus, he was treated to yet another fireside chat, but this one wasn't from the mayor. This one featured ARC's police chief, a man named Santino Hansen. So, Mr. Hansen, what is it you want the people of ARC to know? The voice that answered was gruff, husky, not unpleasant, but certainly not radio ready. We all know the culture of ARC. People go to work all day. They stay out late getting burgers and beer. The ones that don't work are out all night in the morning, especially in Phoenix. The whole bus booed, deafening Richard to some of Hansen's next words. People of ARC want a safer town. They'll have to cooperate with local authorities by keeping the streets clear. I'm advising everyone getting dinner tonight to either go straight home or not go out at all. The days of drug running in our streets are over. ARC is the only survivor settlement in the region besides Los Angeles. They may allow crime over there, but we won't allow it here. Richard scoffed at that. Were he not so silent, he might have booed too. He couldn't stand San Hansen, nicknamed Attack Dog Hansen by the locals. I mean, what was the point? Richard had grown up in a cabin, a mile up from fishermen who had never so much as looked him in the eye. His mother, father, and brother, all dead. He'd survived the trail of blood, and hadn't been easy. His only friend in the whole world had been Solange. And in the end, he lost her too. Everyone in Ark had the same story. They were all just surviving. If Richard were in Sanhansen's position, he'd make sure police minded their own business. For all they knew, those drugs were that person's only source of income. Who was he to question how someone survived? Richard had decided long ago. Anybody who acted like a hero was just stroking their own ego. Maybe that was why he clammed up at Roger's house. He didn't want to come off as cynical, but he could think of nothing else to say. Now, in an especially foul mood, Richard got off the bus and race-walked across the Claymore Circle and towards 10th Street. Beep, beep. As Richard left the bus and started down 10th Street, he heard the noise and turned. There was Roger Marlton's silver box-shaped car coming around the circle where the bus had just let him off. He saw his boss giving him a gentle nod through the windshield, and in the passenger seat, he saw the kid. Kevin was waving wildly at him. They slowed down a bit to let him see them, but he just stood there. There they were again, attempting to pass his boundaries, waving like he was already a member of the family. Nervous, he raised his hand only to his waist, and the boy couldn't see. Roger sped on as the disappointed child looked backwards, and then they were disappearing up Miller's Alley and towards the terrace. When Richard was 10 years old, Bry had dug up all they had in their small, isolated world and given Richard a wooden doll as a birthday present. He placed a tiny stick in its hand to indicate a sword, but Richard couldn't get past the doll's blank, unchanging stare. So Bry had encouraged Richard to look at the tree he had carved it from and pay attention to how the wind moved the branches. Before long, wood seemed more alive to Richard, and he began to find comfort in nature and in spending time with his brother out in the forest. Now a human-sized doll was staring up at him. It was just impossible that this face had ever been Bry's. He was too still, too bloody. The flesh of his neck was swollen and discolored. His face was pale white. Red clods formed under his eyeballs, spilling down like tears. A dark cloud passed under the sun. Richard peered over his brother's shoulder beneath the dock, and there was his father, floating, with his arms and legs down, and all the water around him a disgusting red. Richard could tell he'd been stabbed, but by who? He backed away from the edge, stepping over Brian. Following the stretch of his arm, Richard spied a few droplets of blood lying under his hand. There he saw his brother's knife, colored just like the water. What he was seeing couldn't be real. Someone cried out behind him, and he turned to see a group of fishermen coming from far over the hill. He stared down at Brian, wishing he knew how to move. That this would turn out to be a prank, he dropped to his knees, resting a hand on his brother's heart, hoping to feel it beat just once. When the fishermen arrived, they found Richard kneeling beside the bloody knife with blood on his fingers. Horrified, accusatory men stood over him as he stuttered over his words, looking for a way out. They chased him out of town with knives and guns. A few shots fired off as he charged over the hill. As he ran, he remembered how his father and Bry had buried his mother. They had told him doing so was important, and he wanted to bury them too. But he couldn't. He had to run until he was certain he was alone. Then, far out in the woods, he sank beneath a tall weeping willow tree and wept. "I have no one," he croaked. "No one. I'm all alone. Alone." He collapsed into streaming, terrified tears, far from anyone who would ever take pity on him. He was 16 years old. Pause. I want to check the comment section, make sure that there's no sound problems, nothing like that. I see a lot of people are watching. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. All right, nobody's yelling at me about the sound, so I'm just going to keep going. Okay, that was chapter 4 or 5 rather, and you couldn't see it, but there was a break that I didn't read out loud. I'll show it up there on screen. So a little bit of background. What you just heard was a flashback. The book takes place in 2145 AD, the not so distant future. But that chapter was about 10 years before the start of the story. Little behind the scenes trivia, reading with the author. Okay, let's keep going. I didn't know Luke Motor personally for quite some time, so I can't tell you why he chose this time of his precious day off to stand outside the door of Richard's apartment. I can only tell you why he was there, to pick a fight. When he saw that Richard wasn't at home that morning, he ended up smoking and watching the street until 1:30 p.m. He pressed his back against the burning Empire State mural, his bare chest on display for all the lucky Main Streeters to enjoy. Running a hand through his wavy hair, his eyes drifted to the Bible painting. He didn't fail to acknowledge the damn disgraced thing, as most of Ark's populace did. No, he surveyed false hope and gave the painted book a pat on the spine. I know how you feel. That's what first intrigued me about him, and from then on, I started watching Luke Motor wherever and whenever I could. Luke stayed at that spot until his smoke was smoked and crushed under his shoe. With a shrug of his short leather jacket, he started cruising down Main Street on his motorcycle, the only thing he owned and that he loved. He parked it in an alley just off 10th Street and walked from there to Claymore's. I understand now that he was looking to solve this unemployment issue. At this hour, the Claymore Circle was calm. An overcast sky hung over the tavern sitting just next to the alley near Peak's edge. It was a large wooden shack that somehow held apartments above and carried its wraparound porch like a beer belly. Luke hopscotched up its 8 long steps, bursting through the wide doors with a flourish, but nobody cared. Servers were pouring drinks at the bar and handing them to any one of what looked like well over 80 people, and that was just at the bar. The whole tavern atrium, from the tables on the left to the booths off to the right, seemed to be holding close to 200 guests. As he swam through the crowd, ignoring the blaring music and solicitors shoving CDs at him, he found a seat at the bar. Directly behind were 2 red swinging doors that led into the kitchen. Luke knew that Danny Claymore would emerge from there any minute, so he started rehearsing his lines. Then, the man himself shot up from beneath the bar with a tray from down below. His brow furrowed when he saw Luke, but first he set the tray down and filled 3 glasses for the men seated next to him. "Take a hike, Luke," Claymore belligerently said, his puffy mustache bouncing. "Listen, Sheriff Dan, I need a job," Luke said. Claymore turned away from his patrons and showed Luke the remnants of a fading smile. "Call me that again, and your job will be cleaning the blood out of your jacket." "I'm the perfect candidate," Luke said, not for the first time. "A trail with that. Your boyfriend was just here this morning, asking me on your behalf, and I said the trail with him too." "Boyfriend? Wait, you mean Bart? My landlord? Dude, I have standards, you know." "I want you out of here," Danny said through gritted teeth. "Now." "Look, he's the dealer, not me. I have nothing to do with Bart's business. You know what? Let's do this." Luke clapped his hands together. "Ask me my 3 best skills, and I'll prove to you I'm the perfect candidate. Go on. 1, 2, 3. I'll blow your mind sky high, old-timer." A fist slammed into his mouth, and he was launched backwards like a rock from a slingshot, landed flat on the bar floor to thundering laughter all around him. Then Claymore came around the corner, lifted his powerful arms, and rolled Luke right out the doors. Despite the scrape and pain all over his body, Luke thought the sky of Ark looked quite beautiful from this angle. With no buildings obstructing his view, it was kind of like a baby blue painting full of white wisps. When the pain finally lessened, he pushed himself up and wandered back up the steps, stopping just short of the tavern door. He wasn't one to pick a fight he couldn't win, yet as he leaned against the wooden handrail, he was already plotting a cleverer argument. And he would catch Danny by surprise as soon as he stepped through those doors again. He waited quite a while, crafting his narrative, a narrative about a distant family relationship to the nearest wine distillers and all the discounts he could bring Danny in time, along with, of course, those 3 best skills he was talking about. The tavern doors flung open, and a man turned to Luke with a wide, giddy smile, and Luke's mouth fell open. A head of bleached blonde hair and a hairy chest half concealed by an orange leather jacket stood before him with typically awful timing. Bart! You were in there the whole time? Bart came to lean against the other rail while Luke resisted the temptation to knock him down the flight. Now that was something. Shut up. I don't think I've ever seen a man fly off a bar stool like that. Hey, got a job for you, Bart gloated. Get bent, Luke barked at him. I'm moving. That was his usual declaration of rebellion, which was probably why it just made Bart laugh. The man patted his stomach and struggled to stop laughing. Actually, I snuck through the back to see you since you said you were probably heading here after your thing with your coworker. Wish you never came. Bye-bye, Luke said. Hey, listen. Cops been doubling down lately. A lot of the boys say they're being tailed. We need new blood in the game, Bart said, taking a few steps closer to look. I would owe you, buddy, big time. I can make all your money troubles go away. What do you say? Luke crossed his arms and spit out some blood from the lip Danny Claymore had cut. He had always had a soft spot for this lovable, hot moron. So he turned his back on him, determined to look at anything else, lest he fall right into his hands. This was how Luke ended up staring down Main Street for 5 whole minutes of Bart's business rant. Come on, man, we need you. Luke started to turn around towards that fake pouty face, but something else had caught his eye. The trail? He said. Bart looked over his shoulder, and Luke sensed him going very still. Ark almost never had visitors, let alone on Main Street. On the rarest of occasions, however, camouflage-colored trucks would carry soldiers and generals into town to hold meetings with the mayor, each bearing the symbol of the American military, a tuatara perched upon a tattered flag. Is that the military? Bart exclaimed. There's no way. 2 large cargo trucks. That was what Luke saw now at the edge of Main Street. They had no marks to identify them. People freely mobbed the streets as always, but now they dashed out of the way as the trucks bolted uniformly down all 10 blocks, headed straight for the Claymore Circle. Both trucks roared into the Claymore Circle with such speed Luke was convinced they would run through the tavern. But instead they turned with a screech and flooded the narrow road to the baseball district. Their windows were tinted, preventing anyone from seeing who was inside. Worse yet, the cargo containers were shaking right off their wheels. Something alive in there? Luke wondered aloud, but the engines overtook his voice. Now lunchgoers at Arkburger were coming out for a look. The tavern doors opened behind them, and the porch filled with more witnesses. At Main and 10th, people in the 4-story apartments peered out their windows. We should go after him, Bart said. Luke wanted to believe someone from inside the bar had come out to spout bad ideas and death wishes, but that someone was his landlord, who was determined. His determined expression told Luke he was not kidding around. You're serious, Luke observed, making no effort to hide his disgust. Bart gripped his shoulder. They're headed towards the baseball stadium. If I'm right, we could sneak in and get a good look at them from the top, and then we could identify them to the authorities. Luke, we'll be heroes. Heroes. Luke threw Bart's hands off his shoulders. You're crazy. Trail. The mayor. We could tell the mayor. Who busts the town's heroes? This'll totally elevate my business. The man was unshakable, and Luke had the worst feeling Bart was going to get himself killed if he didn't follow, so he ran after him, and they went towards their bikes. Wait up, you idiot! They picked up their bikes in an alley just off 10th Street and rode right into Gillard Avenue. They almost rode faster than the cops rushing towards the baseball stadium now. By the time the stadium, a huge sapphire torch raised 15 stories to the azure sky, came into view, Luke noticed that the trucks had smashed the walkway that the Marlton crew had spent the last month building and forced their way onto the baseball field, leaving the archway behind them a mess of lumber and debris. A spark of blue-red light lighting struck Luke's eye as a cop car blew past them without so much as a glance in their direction, a rare occurrence indeed. As more cop cars approached, Luke and Bart parked their bikes on the western side of the stadium and vanished into one of the empty stairwells. They moved all the way to the top level, granting them both a nice view of the action and a place to keep their heads low. There goes the hero ploy, Luke thought, as he crouched next to his ambitious partner. From here, Luke could see nothing but the 2 cargo trucks parked crookedly in the center of the field. He could hear the squad blockade forming just outside the northern entrance, while more vehicles sped around the stadium to block off the southern entrance. Those were the only 2 exits large enough for these trucks. The cops had them boxed in. That was his quintessential nightmare, waking up to find that the police had surrounded Bart's place, and both the front and rear exits were blocked off. But it wasn't the cops that churned his stomach today. 4 people emerged from each truck. All 8 of them had rifles and were decked out with military vests, cargo pants, and combat belts, no doubt containing more weapons to choose from. A 9th person emerged, striding between all 8 of them with a casual swagger, and he wore a cowboy hat. While the rest of them faced the cops in either direction in teams of 4, the cowboy just sauntered up to the doors of the cargo containers, and Luke noticed, that he was carrying some kind of remote in his hands, which he tinkered with before reaching for the latches. If bullets started flying behind him, Luke wondered if this guy would even notice. What's his deal? Bart wondered. Keep it down, Luke warned. Whining sirens soon filled the baseball district. Luke and Bart hugged the floor of the upper level, listening as a cop roared into a megaphone. You in the stadium! You have not been granted entry into the city-state of Ark. You are driving 2 unregistered vehicles. You are armed with unregistered weapons. Drop them and come out with your hands on your heads. This is your one and only warning. If you do not comply with these instructions, you will be met with the full power of the Ark police force. Luke couldn't believe his ears. The men and women on the stadium floor were laughing. Creeping to look down into the field, Luke saw them all pointing their weapons, some shaking their shoulders, giddy to begin the shootout. Luke's attention returned to that cowboy leading them. He'd undone both latches behind the cargo trucks. The doors opened like the maws of 2 giant animals. And by this point, Bart had gotten up and crossed the balcony, looking down outside the stadium. He came creeping back to Luke. Dude, there's like 50 cop cars outside, he warned. Luke couldn't believe these rebels. There was just no way they would survive this shootout. Upon hearing another curious sound, Luke abandoned his view of the cargo trucks and crept to the stairwell. Looking out an open maw over the whole baseball district, the barricade of 50 cop cars were about to be overtaken by an army of camouflage-colored jeeps, knocking aside benches and drawing tire marks along every patch of grass. Luke's stomach sank as he made his way back to Bart. It's an ambush. We need to get the hell out of here. But Bart hadn't heard him. He was still staring into the field, and when Luke turned, he understood why. Something was crawling out of the cargo trucks. The cowboy was waving that remote like a magic wand, stepping back as the thing followed him, like they were dancing. The shooters who had been facing the entrance now stepped to the edges of the field, and the cargo hull shook and dented, smashing the wheels down. Luke felt cold as 4 animals stepped onto the field. No. Those weren't animals. Even from the distance, Luke could see they were something more. Oh, my life. Bart was never one to panic out loud, but he was panicking now, as those things looked all around the field, adjusting to their new environment, then turned their gazes towards the cops. Luke felt his heart hammering. The cop shouting into the megaphone had now changed his entire script. Code Red! Our borders have been breached! Code Red! We've been breached! Code Red! The cowboy pointed his remote towards the police. The creatures winced and thrashed as if in pain, then charged towards the entrance. When they reached the cops, their bodies tore through what remained of the archway, and the entire stadium shook. Luke stumbled and lost his cool. He seized Bart's shoulder by the skin, unconcerned about hurting him. Let's go! Then something landed on the top rail right in front of them. They both froze. This one was the size of Luke's palm. Where the trail had come from, high above the stadium, Ark was getting even more chirping visitors. These little critters inches away from his face had their eyes on the stadium floor, and that bought them some time. For the last 5 years, the mayor's annoying PSAs reported that in this kind of situation, civilians should avoid making sudden movements. So he was stuck staring at it. At first glance, it looked like a golden hornet, but rather than wings of chitin, these wings looked like paper clips with razor edges. Its stick-like arms also had razor-edged paws. From its spindle jutted a stinger that dripped a thick green liquid. Luke tried to make eye contact with Bart and whisper one last urgent warning to leave, but just as he tried, the creature turned its head. Luke had once looked a spider right in its 8 little beady eyes before he left it to its business, and he'd shivered all over for several minutes afterward. But now he missed that little critter. This thing's 2 antennae were hanging down over its head as if it had already died. It had 2 red beads for eyes, and its pincers had fallen off, replaced by a drooling triangular row of teeth, its mouth perpetually wrenched open. It had a hunched back attached to its fat spindle, and as it took stumbling steps down the top rail, the spindle swayed back and forth like a tail. "You want to get mauled, idiot?" Luke saw Bart's fist just before he hit the ground in pain. As he lay there, the monster glided over him, its stinger flying at Bart's chin. Bart screamed and fell back, clutching his face as steam rose from behind his fingers. The monster rose into the air, chirping, no, laughing, and Bart hit the ground. Luke crawled over to him and threw his hands over Bart's convulsing chest. "Come on," Luke pleaded, sliding an arm under his back. "Come on, stupid, don't die on me." Bart's eyes fluttered, but he didn't respond. The usual board game, Cards on Cards, sat on the kitchen table. It belonged to Kevin's older brothers. Years ago, one night after dinner, Kevin's mother took his hand in her 2 front fingers and led him into the living room. She brought him to a picture of a much younger couple, neither of whom he recognized. "That's your father, and that's me," she said with a jubilant tone. His father was taller and thinner in the picture, the strongest man Kevin had ever seen, and his mother had longer hair without his widening belly or gray hairs, and Evelyn with a long braid not wrapped up, all in front of a large green sign that read, "Welcome to Albuquerque." Beside them were 2 young men beaming with delight. "Those are your brothers, Elijah and Roger Jr. We called him Raj," she finished with a chuckle, and tears formed in her eyes. As soon as she said that, Kevin studied them much more closely, going back every day to look at the picture again. Roger Jr. looked a lot like his dad, with huge beaming eyes and a smile that made his cheeks puffy. They were both dressed in striped shirts, and from then on, Kevin was convinced that his father and his big brother loved all the same things. Elijah, on the other hand, had darker skin and curlier hair, just like his mother. He dressed with a red vest and showed off his muscles, even though the other 3 were more covered up. Kevin decided that Elijah was the cool one of the group, a suggestion that later made his mother laugh out loud. Of course, Kevin started asking all about them, so he could know everything, but he ended up mostly learning about his parents. Past a certain point, his mother couldn't answer his questions anymore. She'd get very quiet and start to tear up. To put Kevin's questioning to rest, his father stepped in once, only once, and told the boy the facts. Mankind's predator had killed both of his brothers. Worse than that, mankind's predator had changed them and turned them against each other. There was nothing either of his parents could do. After telling him that story, his father started talking to him every day about prayer, and how if he did it persistently, he would always keep the beasts away from him. In time, Kevin changed his questioning. He started asking his parents when they had him. So his father brought him to Juliana's, and at a young age, Kevin had learned the truth. "Tell me," his father said. Kevin snapped back to reality and counted his cards. "What is totally rad?" It sounded so wrong coming out of his father's stern mouth. "Oh, Dad, don't do that." "Do what?" "What you just did." "Put your cards down," his mother ordered, and they obeyed. As his father gathered up the cards, he cleared his throat with a sly grin, and Kevin knew he was about to be embarrassed a second time. He held up his remaining cards, face down, as if they were guns. Dad, I'm warning you. What is totally rad? Card number 1. Stop, Kevin said. His mother laughed and shushed him. They played every Sunday. It was because of embarrassing moments like this, spread out over many years, that Kevin rarely thought about the sad facts he'd learned about his family. In Kevin's mind, the world outside their home was scary, but his father worked hard to keep it all away from them. Because of that, Kevin's trips from home to school to baseball practice all went off without a hitch. That was until last year when he met a girl. Total. 1 second. His phone buzzed in his pants pocket. Roger flipped it open and held up a finger. Hang on, it's Bill, he said, and swept out of the room. Right in the middle of our game, his mother said. Want to switch his cards? Kevin offered. No cheating. Kevin groaned, tapping his card hands on the table as he inspected his options. Sorry, all, Roger called as he returned to the room. Old man just needed some help turning on his TV. I hope I never get old. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but careful. I'm still paying for this house, he said to Evelyn. She cupped a hand over her mouth and both of them laughed. Don't do it, Kevin warned his father as he picked up the cards again. If I brought Adria here, she'd dump me. Would you stop with that girl? His father said, a faint pang of annoyance in his voice. He flipped a card. Dad's crusty beard. Why, you little. Wasn't me, Kevin said, throwing up his hands. He caught his mother laughing and pointed. It was her, see? She's the one. Suddenly, both his parents' phones were buzzing. Lord, who are all these people today? His mother said, getting up to check her phone, which was over on the kitchen counter. Right in the middle of a game, his father said, wagging his finger. While she opened her phone, his father let his ring. Aren't you going to get that, Dad? How can I do that and get even with you at the same time, Mr. Dad's crusty beard? It was Mom. Look, here's my card. I'll prove it to you, he said, and reached across the table. He flipped it over and his father leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. What is totally rad, according to you, boy? It's riding a skateboard with a boombox on your shoulder. Oh, Dad, don't say it like that. That's the best card to put down. His father sighed. What more can I do to teach my family about good humor? Before Kevin could answer, his mother ran back into the room and grabbed his father's shoulder. Never seen her do that before. Though she hollered at them both when they got on her nerves, she never got physical, never with such urgency, especially with his dad. She would always call his name or walk up to him slowly or be careful not to interrupt anything important, but now she was yanking on his shoulder and shoving her flip phone in his face. This can't be, she said. And as Kevin looked on, he noticed something else about his mother. Her face was beginning to lose color. She wasn't smiling or laughing anymore. In fact, he'd never seen her like this. Mom, what's wrong? His father took the phone, and his mouth started to fall open. Onto something, he pulled out his own phone and flipped it open, then stared at both screens at the same time. When his mother looked at them both, her eyes widened, and she started gasping. Oh, my life. I don't believe it, his father said. What's going on? Roger dropped the phone and left the table. Kevin kept asking, but neither would answer him. When his father left the room, Kevin went around the table and looked at the phone screen himself. The words read, Code Red, City-State Perimeter Breach, Lock down your homes, Evacuation Procedures A, B, C, D, E, in effect. What's that mean? Kevin asked. In response, he felt his mother's arms wrapping around him, pulling him close. Oh, Kevin, she whispered. Oh, my boy, this can't happen to you. It can't. All of this was frustrating him. What was scaring them so much that they had to scare him like this? He just wanted an explanation. Then there was a sound outside. He'd never heard it before. And for some reason, it just didn't sit right with him. It was a long siren, like one he'd heard from a fire truck. But a fire truck siren was loud and high-pitched, just like a police car. It made him instantly realize there was something going on, and he just needed to get out of the way. This siren was low, and it droned on for over 10 seconds before it diminished. Each blast only made him feel worse as it penetrated the walls of their house and made the hairs of his arms stand up. He and his mother stood there in the hallway as a cloud passed over the house. He could see his father standing in the open doorway, looking out at the street as a voice started speaking between the sirens. Code Red, Protocol 2, lock down your homes. Code Red, Protocol 2, lock down your homes. His father threw the door shut and drew the blinds. Then he turned off the lights. Now Kevin could see shadows accompanied by those horrifying drones that the cop's low, monotone voice was announcing. It all worked together to make his blood run cold. Now his mother was squeezing him even tighter. He was grateful for that much. But how? She said to his father. How? Why didn't the troops catch them? I don't know, his father said. His eyes were everywhere but on her. We need to act fast. What's going on? Kevin piped up. Is it drug dealers? Are the police chasing somebody? No, Roger said. It's the beasts. When Richard heard the sirens, he just finished a workout routine. The gym had a bright orange interior with tuataras painted on every wall, just like the exterior walls of the market were painted with beasts. Typically, he shared the space with 10 other people at a time, but now people from the flower and jewelry shops across the street were flooding the entrance, almost breaking the door off its hinges. The gym's owner was away, so it was left to the regulars to control the crowd. But Richard stood behind them, just watching it all unfold. He slipped his white t-shirt over his sweaty chest as he listened to what they were saying. They're here, we have to hide. Turn off the lights, they said in the clamor. And as chaos filled the room, Richard too began to hear it, that low drone, the voice announcing lockdown procedures. They were in a code red. What? He whispered as he moved towards the window, far left of the door. Outside, he saw Ark was in a frenzy. Street-side benches had all been abandoned. People were leaving small, flimsy shops that had just been patronizing and were trying to flood larger, thicker buildings, creating backups at several doors, just like the one in this gym. Meanwhile, police cars were in the street, and not like usual. They drove slowly, their sirens just red. Normally, their vehicles would flash both red and blue. A purely red siren, red as blood, painting Market Street, meant one thing. Mankind's predator had come to Ark. Evacuate, evacuate, move to your designated safe zone. Evacuate, evacuate, move to your safe zone. Richard stepped back. All morning long, he'd been doing the same thing he always did, walking. If he wasn't working, he was walking, sleeves down, collar buttoned, eyes averted, alone. He'd walked until he'd begun to forget the point and stopped at the gym to take his mind off all the chaos of nothing. For the next hour, he'd been stimulated and nourished with water. He'd done 10 deadlifts after 200 push-ups, thinking all the while of his rigorous childhood training under his older brother. In fact, he'd begun to wonder if seeing him in this gym would have made his brother proud. It seemed as soon as he was done, the chaos had started. Now he was just trying to catch up. They can't be here, he whispered. There had to be some mistake. The desert surrounding Ark was heavily manned. Soldiers on the mayor's payroll stood at various outposts where they would spot any rogue travelers and stop all traffic before they could determine that the visitors would not threaten the city-state. Richard had no idea what happened if the soldiers discovered a threat, but around town, people gossiped about some zero-tolerance policy, coup de grace. If that was true, then this shouldn't be happening. If Mankind's predator were spotted in the desert near Ark, Code Red meant the beasts were already here, inside town. And yet as he watched the squad vehicles cruise down Market Street with those blood-red lights flashing, he just couldn't accept the reality. Why are they here? Why? His hand drifted to the gash hidden under his shirt. As years went by without a crisis, and the pressures of Ark's economy put him on edge, he'd just forgotten about the world beyond their border. What were they all about to experience? And that, folks, is chapter 6. Thank you so much for listening. Let's listen in on some, look in on some comments here. All right. Thank you for the share. Thank you so much for the share. This has been a fun time. I saw a lot of people were watching. Let's check over on YouTube. I think we got some views on there. We're simulcasting this evening. Very exciting. Very nice. Thanks to all the viewers on here. Alrighty, well, as usual, I am going to post the link to buy. Please know that if you decide to purchase this evening, you will be supporting a local author, which is always important. Local authors, we're competing against the big fish on the market. So any support that you give us, any share, any mention, any Facebook post, anything of the sort, whenever we get support from you, that gives us a leg up against all the people monopolizing the market. So thank you very much. I hope you'll consider buying, and if not, I hope you'll consider sharing it with someone you know. This is the Calipar, The Children of Arc, a book that I worked on for 4 years with help from my dear wife, Carey. I was thinking I might play a few little promotional clips I made for you to play this episode out. So sit back and relax and enjoy the show. And that concludes our reading for tonight. Thank you all for watching, and we will be back tomorrow. That was quite a cliffhanger, right? The stuff really hits the fan in chapters 5 and 6, and there's plenty more to read about. So if you're interested to see what happens next, if you're on the edge of your seat, which I hope you are, you can check back in tomorrow night at 9:30. Same place, same time, same book. We'll show you what happens to Richard and the poor old residents of Ark as this situation continues to devolve. Anyway, thank you all so much for being here, and good night.